So it's my joy to be able to welcome today's speaker for our IRIS conference. It's JD Stillwater, and believe me, his list of accomplishments is so very long that I could take up all this time to do it. Let me just highlight a few of the things. He's past president and trustee of the Unitarian Church of Harrisburg, but he's a frequent speaker there and at many of the other Unitarian congregations in Pennsylvania, in nearby states. He's very active in music ministry, transition team. He's done many different programs. Some of them sound really exciting. I wish I could hear all of them. Unraveling COVID, combustion addiction, science and interconnection, many other topics. It's kind of really exciting. So it's really my joy to welcome him today. He's going to talk today about nature's scripture, cultural insights from natural reality. So please let's allow our speaker to get on. And I just want to remind everybody as we're doing this, you should enter your questions in the Q&A, and we will handle all the questions after we've heard from both the speaker and from the respondent. Go ahead, JD, take it away.
Thank you, Gail. I've been really looking forward to this. As some of you may know, I just concluded a 24-year career as a high school science teacher. And you know how when you teach something, you obtain a much deeper understanding of it? I just realized I haven't started my slides. Let me do that before I get too far into this. Share screen, slides. Okay. I do. Okay. I think.
Yeah, we see them.
Got the green box, so we should be good to go. So when I started teaching, I started noticing things, implications of the science concepts I was teaching that were astounding and meaningful to me. For example, at some point teaching about photosynthesis, I realized that all plants, even giant sequoias, they make themselves from nothing more solid than carbon dioxide and water. Air and water, that's it. The total mass of minerals in the plant is just the tiny amount of ashes that are left if the plants get burned. All the rest is constructed from air and water. And because we make our bodies from plants and animals that eat plants, it's true of us too. Now, this was a revelation to me because it means I am part of the atmosphere. I'm part of the water cycle. I am mostly air and water, somehow solid and walking around on land. Kind of crazy, right? Another example, Newton's law of universal gravitation allows us to calculate the force of gravity between any two bodies with mass, like an apple and the earth, or the earth and the sun. So I give my students these made-up practice problems for homework, like two soup cans a meter apart out in interstellar space, and the gravitational attraction between your body and that kid you have a crush on the next classroom over, or your body and a single iron atom somewhere on Neptune. Fun stuff. But the revelation came when I realized that no matter how small the objects are or how far apart, the force of gravity between them is never zero. It can be really, really small, but it's never zero. This was a revelation because it means that there are invisible threads of gravitational connection between my body and everything in the universe. Gravity holds galaxies together, and my body contributes to the rotation speed of the Milky Way. Cosmologist Brian Swim used to say, metaphorically, of course, gravity is love. Well, it is a force of attraction, and it includes everything in the universe that has mass. When I consider that contemplatively, it does feel viscerally like some kind of cosmic hug. So I began collecting these revelations, and I found a lot of them. In 2012, I put them together into a presentation on the spirituality that I experienced from thinking about them and applying them in my life, or trying to. Please understand that I use the word spiritual the way Carl Sagan did, to refer to the experience of taking nature to heart and finding it is deeply meaningful to me. If it profoundly enriches my life at an emotional level, and if it invites me into contemplation, wonder, and reverence, then I say it's part of my spirituality. So 10 years ago, I created a multimedia talk called 7 Candles. It's an exploration of 7 broad categories of these revelations, and it's chock full of challenging science, along with an invitation to integrate it into your own spirituality, however you define it. During those 10 years, I've developed dozens of spin-off talks and workshops, some of which Gail mentioned a minute ago. But 7 Candles is where it all began. Since the pandemic, though, I've been looking out at a world that seems to be crumbling around me and asking myself, what does the world need? I want my work to help address that. What does the world need? Well, a partial answer comes from my daughter. In the spring of 2020, she was working as a chaplain at the Veterans Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. April 2020, New York City. Do you remember? Her hospital was completely filled with COVID patients who were dying alone and scared. Just imagine being their chaplain under those circumstances. A friend of hers learned about her work and asked her, how do you stay positive? She said, I don't. I stay connected. Wow. Another partial answer comes from seeing what can blossom when I truly listen to people without spending the whole time preparing my response, or from noticing how our arrogance is affecting the Earth's systems. Speaking of which, anyone noticed any changes in the weather? It's too late to avoid significant global heating. It's already here. Even if we do enough to prevent the worst case, we're going to need resilience. We'll need to expect change because the world is in constant flux. That's always been true, but it feels more pressing now. A partial answer comes from recent politics and the crazy level of polarization out there. It seems like we just can't resist a simplistic black and white binary, even when it's obviously wrong or bad for us. Then along comes a pandemic, a rapidly evolving situation that gives us plenty of chances to roll with ambiguity and nuance. And every time we get attached to some simple self-righteous dogma about it, it slaps us with another variant. Call me crazy, but since I'm science-oriented, I mostly look for answers from science. And when I do that, I find guidance, lots of it. I find guidance that extends far beyond mere facts and into realms of my being and experience that I can only call spiritual or religious, but that also have relevance for my daily life, my relationships, and my worldview. The guidance is sometimes kind of unsettling, but it's based on evidence about how natural reality works, whether you call it creation and see it as the work of God, or just a manifestation of physical laws operating on their own. It's an approach to inspiration and spirituality that's based on what we know rather than on what we believe. But it's an approach that includes my beliefs while informing them and transcending them. So it's not either science or spirituality, but it's both. And for me, it's had powerful implications for who I am and what's important to me and what's important for me. I think if we want to heal ourselves in the earth, we should begin with what we know, things we mostly agree on and can weigh the available evidence for. Conveniently, this is exactly what science does. Science concerns itself with what is. It's up to each of us to determine what it means. Human beings are hardwired for meaning making. We can't avoid it. We think in metaphors and analogies. And when we're doing science, it's crucial that we hew as closely as possible to the raw facts. And it's really important not to confuse our models and metaphors with reality itself. But make no mistake, meaning will be made from new knowledge, one way or another. When scientists and science writers vehemently insist that the cosmos is devoid of meaning, they may be right, but at best they leave a void that will get filled with something. At worst, they encourage people to reject science altogether because our guts tell us that nothing is completely meaningless. Theologians and other clergy spend their lives, their careers doing exegesis, interpreting sacred texts so as to make meaning from them that will be of value to the lives of their people. Why not do this with a source of truth and inspiration we all share across all divisions of culture and religion? When I look at natural reality as science is revealing it, interpreting it like a religious text, I see common threads. I see patterns that have meaning, not only for me personally, but that offer to help heal a broken culture on a critically ill planet. I call them the insights, and I'm just going to skim through a few of them, and then I'll offer some examples of where I see them operating in nature. First, let me acknowledge that what I'm doing here is not science, but exegesis. It's interpretation. It's meaning making from the findings of science. Someone else might look at the same science knowledge and interpret it differently. The insights I see include unity and kinship, the oneness and interdependence of all people, things, and events. Humility and significance. Do we even matter? Emergence. Wholes can be greater than the sum of their parts, and that's kind of amazing. From evolution, we know that human nature evolved, and it's not your fault. Stay tuned. Death is an equal partner with life. Cooperation is as important as competition, if not more so. Diversity is crucial to resilience and innovation. And from physics, complementarity and ambiguity are about rejecting false binaries and embracing nuance and uncertainty. So for most of this talk, the insights are going to be at the top of every slide, highlighted when they're relevant. And there are a lot more of them, but this is enough for one webinar. Maybe it's too much. There is a reason evolution has been so controversial. Its implications for meaning making are sweeping, with insights about kinship, human nature, the role of death, diversity and cooperation, and on and on. Some of them directly contradicting guidance from ancient scriptures. And I'm just going to touch on a few. When I was 7 or 8, I was finally allowed to ride my bike by myself a few miles to Burt's Pharmacy, where there was something that wasn't in our house: candy. One day, I rode my bike there and I shoplifted a candy bar, but I wasn't devious enough to hide the evidence. And my mom marched me right back to the store to apologize and pay for it. Why would a child steal something? Why do I even now still mindlessly eat an entire bag of potato chips in one sitting? Or get really angry and say things I know I'll regret? Is it just me? Is it because human nature is inherently weak and sinful? What is human nature? Where does it come from? We know now that I'm here because my ancestors survived long enough to produce me. And they survived because they had what it took at the time, traits which they passed down to me. Ancestors that didn't have those traits didn't survive as well and didn't have as many descendants. Those traits, all of them, make me who I am, even the ones I don't really appreciate about myself. And even those are just traits that don't happen to fit with my current environment. We crave things that used to be scarce, like calories and salt, but which are now overabundant. So when I set out to rise above those cravings, which do you think will serve me better? Shame for having them, or gratitude that they made my existence possible? Well, recovering addicts will tell you that gratitude works while shame worsens. Those traits are part of what is, not because we're inherently sinful, but because they're how we survived. Accepting that with gratitude will take me further than any amount of shame. So when you're facing these traits, don't berate yourself for your evolved nature. Just thank your ancestors for surviving and then do the right thing. The kind of genetic testing being done routinely now makes clear that every human being on this planet is a distant cousin. How do we treat a cousin we've never met that turns up at a family reunion. Now, I'm not just talking about people who look and sound like me. I'm talking about that homeless person I ignored yesterday, and the guy who cut me off on the highway, and the world leaders I regard as evil. Those are my cousins too. Knowing that they are my cousins, how then shall I speak about my political opponents? And it doesn't stop with people. Those same genetic tests and many other lines of evidence from every conceivable angle show us that every living thing on this planet is blood related, even the ones with nothing like blood, and only a little more distantly than your human cousins. For example, this is my 304,325,256 cousin, 110,385,693 times removed. Her name is Bertha, and she loves poop. She has an illustrious career in the recycling industry, and she's always been kind to me. The family tree, the tree of life is a family tree with branches for every living thing on this planet. This is not just somebody's conjecture. There is overwhelming evidence that the tree of life is a family tree, and we can map out precise relationships based on the genetic code. We humans are neither the root nor the apex of that tree. We're just one leaflet on one small branch. No evolutionary change can happen in a population if its members are all clones of each other. When there's diversity, natural selection has something to work with, promoting those who are most aligned with a changing environment and hindering those who aren't. Diversity is therefore a prerequisite for resilience. That's what biologists mean by survival of the fittest. It's not that some members are better by some arbitrary standard, but rather that as the environment changes, those individuals whose traits allow them to thrive in the new context will make it, while others don't. When I was a child, my parents were Shaklee distributors, which meant that for us, a treat was a Shaklee energy bar. They were nothing like candy, believe me. One day we noticed that a colony of ants had chewed a hole in the wrapper of an energy bar that had fallen unnoticed under a radiator. To their credit, my parents treated it as a science project and let them eat. And those ants were fascinating. I spent hours on my belly watching them, day after day, noticing how they walked in thin lines like highways, complete with passing lanes, and noticing how they touched antennae with each ant as they passed. Within about a month, the ants had carried off the entire bar. Why am I telling you this? Well, survival of the fittest has almost always meant survival of the most cooperative. Yes, there is competition between individuals and between species, but survival is often a team sport. So cooperators have an advantage. The worker ants that disassembled that energy bar had no chance of having baby ants of their own. They were working to support their sisters and nieces who would have children. Cooperation is the essence of every major advance in the complexity of life on Earth. In the eukaryotic revolution, single-celled bacteria engulfed but didn't digest their neighbors to the benefit of both. Then single cells cooperated to make the first multicellular organisms. And then later, some of those multicellular creatures cooperated in societies like ants and people and many other species. The fossil record reflects greater and greater scales of cooperation, building upon each other to increase complexity. Cooperation and diversity are winning strategies. Are there ways we could restructure our economic and business systems to take better advantage of them? That was a rhetorical question, by the way. I hope your answer is heck yeah. Carl Sagan once said, the secrets of evolution are time and death. And he's right, of course. Evolution can't happen without death, and ecosystems can't function without it either. Remember, our ancestors' survival came at the expense of our evolutionary aunts and uncles, like the dinosaurs. We wouldn't be here if they hadn't made way for us by dying. Well, I'm a dinosaur too. I too will someday make way for something new by dying. I was talking with my daughter about this, and she said, yeah, just imagine if pre-Civil War plantation owners were still around, dominating national politics. Max Planck famously said something to the effect that science progresses funeral by funeral. Well, it's true of social and political evolution too. Death is a gift. We animals live by eating, which necessarily involves killing. Even when you bite into a fresh apple, the cells in that apple are alive, and eating them kills them. Knowing that all life on the planet is part of a single family tree means we eat our cousins and they eat us in a circle of life and death that's inherently created. It's not a binary. Death is not an enemy. Death too is essential to the whole. Death is a gift from the past that we will each pay forward. I just noticed my camera may not be on. CJ, are you seeing me? It looks like when I screen shared, it went off.
No, your camera's not on, JD.
I'm not even seeing how to turn it back on. Once I started screen sharing it, I don't have it.
Start video button.
It's not there.
If you hover toward the bottom of the screen.
No, I know where it should be. It's just not there. Let me stop sharing and we'll come back in. There, start video. Let's see what happens when I share again. Well, I'm still there now.
Yeah, you're still visible and your screen is sharing, so you're okay.
I'm sorry you haven't been able to see my gesticulations as I speak. Now you can. All right, where were we? Life and death being essential to one another. I like to say life and death are like an adorable old married couple that celebrates their billion-year anniversary by making flirty eyes at each other and still having tickle fights under the covers. Whether we like it or not, they go everywhere together. We might as well make friends with death. Knowing that death and life are one only goes so far when we're grieving, though. Grief is hard. Someone once told me, we don't get love without grief, no matter how a relationship ends. The more profound the love, the more profound the grief. Grief, too, is us, is natural, is sacred. It's just hard. And it's made harder by a culture that avoids discussing it. Let's talk about death. If ecological trends continue, we may see a lot of death in the next few decades. We might as well start talking about it vulnerably and authentically. Evolution isn't finished. Evolution isn't finished. We can't do much about genetic evolution, but cultural evolution is something we each have a hand in, and it's often more powerful than genetic evolution. I think natural reality offers insights that could really accelerate cultural evolution, because when our guidance comes from interpreting the scripture of reality itself, the cultural shifts that result will be better aligned with how reality works. And I just don't see a downside to that. Earlier, I mentioned that our bodies are mostly made of air and water, plus a tiny amount of minerals. Well, the atmosphere, hydrosphere, and lithosphere are interconnected, inseparable systems, and we live on and inside them. They flow through us. Rocks dissolve in water, get washed to the ocean, then become seashells, then bird bones or rocks again. River becomes ocean, then cloud, then apple, then human, then air, all at once, up, down, across, and around, with interconnections and shortcuts everywhere. Here on Earth, all boundaries and distinctions are either arbitrary or temporary. Matter flows through me rapidly, daily, coming from elsewhere on the planet and going on to other adventures afterwards. Until recently, I used the word interdependence for this, but it never felt quite adequate. We are not separate objects that depend on trading materials and energy with other objects. We are integral elements of a greater whole. It's overly reductive, I think dangerously so, to conceive of my body as somehow separate from, for example, the carbon cycle. I'm in it. I am it, at least in part. Recently, I heard someone use the word interbeing as proposed by Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh. I think interbeing fits better, not an existence as a distinct but interdependent object, but rather integral interbeing with a living planet in a creative cosmos. In nature, there's no such thing as rugged independence. There's no sovereignty, no private property, no central authority. I hate to bear disappointing news, but pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps isn't real. We are always interexisting with others. We are Earth. None of us were dropped here by aliens fully formed, right? There are days when I feel like I must have been, but no, I was born here, and my body is made and remade of the dust, water, and air of the earth. It flows through me every day. I am Earth. We are Earth. The poet Rumi said, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." Interbeing extends beyond Earth too. Every atom on Earth came from somewhere, and now we know where. All the atoms heavier than hydrogen and helium were forged inside the furnaces of exploding supernova stars. Stars make all those other elements out of hydrogen and helium. Remember, this is the origins of our bodies we're talking about. Did you know that the main elements in your body are in the same order of abundance as elements in the universe as a whole? Except for helium and neon, who don't play well with others and are extremely rare on Earth. I want to show you a short clip about this.
I know that the molecules in my body are traceable to phenomenon in the cosmos. And it's our 15 pounds of gray matter that figured this out. There's a kinship with the cosmos that resonates deeply with New Age thinking, but I'm not apologetic about that. It's what we find. If whatever we find resonates with whoever, go ahead, take it. And when I reflect on our kinship with the cosmos, when I do the calculation that shows that a 15-ton meteorite that we have in the center of the Rose Center for Earth and Space, it's an iron meteorite. When I do the calculation that shows that if you take all of the iron from the hemoglobin of the people in the tri-state area of New York City, you can recover that much iron out of their blood and realize that the iron from that meteorite and the iron from your blood has common origin in the core of a star. Tell me what part of my brain is lighting up, because that excites me. That makes me want to grab people in the street and say, have you heard this?
We can go back further. We now also know where the hydrogen and helium atoms came from. They came from light. The quarks that would later form those first atoms condensed out of pure energy at the beginning of time in a process called Big Bang nucleosynthesis. That means, cosmically speaking, our family tree goes all the way back to the dawn of time. And we are interbeing with everything in the universe and with the flow of time. We are the universe come alive. Okay, so we're the universe. Who cares? We live for, at most, a little over 100 years. In the context of deep time, cosmic time, it's nothing. If you use a powerful space-based telescope to look at a tiny empty space between the stars, this is what you see. Every one of those points of light is not a star, but a galaxy of stars. And we see this in all directions, uncountable galaxies with uncountable stars. It's called a deep field image, and somebody at NASA used the redshifts of these galaxies to create this 3D animation. It's beautiful. Astronomers estimate now that we can see about 2 trillion galaxies, averaging around 400 billion stars in each one. Those are big numbers. 2 trillion times 400 billion stars. And in recent years, we've learned that most stars are surrounded by planets. So when we say stars, we mean whole solar systems. There are more solar systems in the visible universe than there are grains of sand on the Earth. I'll give you a second to let that sink in. More solar systems than grains of sand. From the perspective of deep time and deep space, we are nothing. Neil deGrasse Tyson likes to say, we are a speck on a speck on a speck on a speck. There's nothing like astronomy for instilling a sense of humility. So, why bother with really anything? Well, one of those pictures, this one, is a photograph of Earth taken by Voyager 1 from beyond the orbit of Neptune. Your entire measly life, all of human history, all of evolution took place on that tiny speck. Carl Sagan referred to it as a pale blue dot suspended in a sunbeam, a speck. On the other hand, as far as we know, the only sentient life in the entire universe is here on Earth. So are we a speck times 4, or are we precious beyond measure? We're both. I think an appropriate level of humility, informed by knowledge of our significance, is exactly what's needed to honor with our behavior the preciousness of life on this most rare and precious living planet. In 2017, I was fortunate. I got to travel to Oregon's Central Desert with a group of students to see the Great American Eclipse. And I knew it would be a cool astronomical event, but I really had no idea. The experience was ineffable, and my attempts to describe it have always fallen short, but I'm going to try here. There was this feeling of anticipation when the moon first made contact with the sun's disk and then slowly began devouring it. It was slow, but it was fun to watch. And over the next hour or so, the light around us dimmed, not suddenly or obviously, but the whole world began to look thin, kind of papery, two-dimensional. And then it was dark, not midnight dark. The horizon looked like early dawn, but all around, not just in the east. Stars twinkled clear and bright over our heads. Tendrils of misty light streamed out from the ominous black disk where the sun should have been. And I became intensely aware that the light I was seeing from the sun's corona traced a laser straight line of connection from my eye up through the atmosphere, just glancingly touching the moon and reaching all the way to the sun, drawing me into their primordial dance, a dance that conjoins space and time and marries dynamism with stillness and connects descendants with ancestors. But these weren't thoughts. I felt all of that all at once, like a cool shower on a hot afternoon. It was overwhelming, breathtaking, beautiful. And then it was over. 2 minutes of totality is painfully short. I exhaled and discovered that I was sobbing with joy and awe. It was quite an experience. And your chance is coming. The next total eclipse in North America is April 2024. Don't miss it. Don't miss it. Anne and I are already making plans. In a time when so many of us are feeling disconnected and insignificant, it's been helpful to me to be mindful of those connections. You know, what my hands do, I do, because my hands don't operate independently of me. And by analogy, what I do, Earth does, because I don't operate independent of the Earth. And the entire universe does it for the same reason. Everything I do or don't do matters. The universe is like a precious work of art. Changing any part of it changes the whole thing. And when that part is the only place where there's life, however small, it really matters. To even imagine otherwise requires a notion of separation, a worldview of separation It's simply not supported by how nature works on all scales. You and your choices matter. You can't not matter. We are the eyes and hands of the universe. There are more solar systems in the visible universe than there are grains of sand on Earth. And there are more water molecules in a tablespoon of water than all the stars and sand grains combined. Air and water molecules are so small and so numerous and cycle around the Earth so constantly that every cup of beverage you've ever swallowed contained over 150 million molecules that at some point passed through Jesus's body during his lifetime. The same cup contains even more molecules that passed through Buddha's body, just because he lived long. It's true of anybody that ever lived more than a few decades ago. So, you know, pick your prophet or any ancestor of any species. To me, this means that all water is holy water. And when I consider that as I drink, it orients me. It connects me with all the ancestors on a dynamic living planet. I encourage you to try it. If we keep acting like we're separate and like the cosmos is ours to commodify, we will continue damning ourselves and our children to the hellish future that is already looming just ahead. Interbeing means that what Martin Luther King said about human justice applies also to everything that is. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Still on the topic of holistic worldviews, the science of emergence tells us that whole systems can often be greater than the sum of their parts. And most of you are probably familiar with this idea, at least a little bit. So I'm just going to give one example. When the first living cell came together, however that happened, a new emergent property emerged in the universe, striving. Before that, the universe had no striving, no seeking, no trying. We might say, from nothing but non-living materials came something more, life. A note here, the something more isn't the stuff of the cell, it's the cell's efforts. And building on that one emergent property, life on Earth evolved uncountable other emergent properties like senses, flight, sexuality. And when human language came along, we got poetry, reason, technology, religion, and so on. With emergence, 1 + 1 = 3. It's like magic. Note that none of these emergent qualities are objects. These are not things you can count or put in a jar. Something's going on with my slide here. These aren't things that you can collect. This is why I prefer to say natural reality rather than material reality. I think we too often conflate these two as though reality is made up entirely of materials, stuff, things, objects, atoms. It's not. But most of us still operate in a Newtonian paradigm in which everything is mechanical, predictable, mundane, a clockwork universe. Whether you're building a clock or dropping it out of an airplane, Newton's laws are still exactly what you need. But emergence tells us that some of the most important and influential qualities in our lives aren't made of atoms. They're emergent. They're real, they're natural, but they're not material in the sense of being objects. They consist of the interactions between things or interactions with other emergent properties. Emergent properties are real like square dancing is real. The dance takes up space. You can't just go running through there. But the dance is an event, not a thing. It's a happening, not a thingy thing. It's not a material, but it acts like a material. When the music stops, the dance doesn't go anywhere, it just evaporates. So for me, the phrase natural reality is more appropriate. It feels more appropriate than material reality, because I don't want my language to leave people stuck in a Newtonian worldview. As disruptive as emergence is to our worldviews, quantum reality goes even further. And we now know that atoms are made of things that have a dual nature. Subatomic entities can behave like waves, an expression of energy, or like objects, an expression of matter. And how they show up depends on the experiment we do. That word particles is now used by physicists to include both aspects, but for most people, the word particle invokes little objects like little planets or little balls. That's an inaccurate and incomplete picture. Actually, if you want to be accurate, you can't really picture them accurately except through mathematical expressions. And built into those equations is inherent ambiguity. A straightforward question like, where is it now and how fast is it moving, cannot be answered except in probabilities. And this isn't limited to some subatomic entities. Whole atoms and even large molecules have now been shown to have this dual nature. And this is the stuff our everyday world is made out of, including our bodies. For a century now, quantum physicists have had to work in a field in which ambiguity is fundamental, unavoidable. What would the world be like if we caught up with the physicists and embraced ambiguity in our lives and relationships and our politics? How do you describe your ex? Is the robbery suspect a punk and a thug, or is she a frightened teenager with emotional scars from a traumatic childhood? Do you have a black and white stance on the political issues of the day, or do you seek out the nuance, the ambiguities they present? The universe is made of stuff that is fundamentally ambiguous. Our Western worldview, as expressed in our religion and our politics, our cultural norms, is a century behind the physicists. It's really tempting to ask, but what are subatomic particles really? Well, it gets worse because one is matter and the other is energy. And these are mutually exclusive, like alive and dead, empty and full, black and white, fire and water, heads and tails, good and evil. How can they be both? For subatomic entities, a century of exhaustive experimentation confirms that they are both simultaneously until we observe them. This is called complementarity. It's a situation in which two mutually exclusive conditions are somehow both simultaneously true. Complementarity is fundamental to every object we interact with all day long, including our own bodies. This is what matter is made of. Niels Bohr, one of the people who discovered this and who coined the term complementarity, said, quote, "Everything we call real is made of things that cannot be regarded as real." At that point, Bohr had a Newtonian worldview. So to him, real meant material substance, objects. Now we know quantum entities are real, but in the way that square dancing is real. Except even the dancers are made of this paradoxical non-stuff. It's very mysterious, but also very instructive, because it means that in this universe, all our grand either-or logic now has an asterisk, a qualifying footnote that says, sometimes mutually exclusive conditions can both be true. And not just sometimes, but fundamentally expressed in the existence and behavior of matter and energy. This is not an either-or universe. This is a both-and universe. Notice that our both-and reality includes either-or realities, such as coin flips. When you flip a coin, it will land either on one side or the other. And that either-or outcome takes place in a universe that includes both of those possibilities while the coin's in the air. And the coin itself is made of both-and quantum particles. Both-and is everything, is wholeness. And it includes moments and regions of localized or temporary separation. What meaning do we take from this? Well, if a proton can be both a wave and a particle, you can surely be both masculine and feminine. A biracial child can be both white and black and not have to explain herself to anybody. An embryo can be both an invasive lump of undifferentiated tissue and a potential human being. Clearly, reducing these to binaries in our political sphere has not protected us from the social pain of grappling authentically with the nuances involved. If we want to be honest and authentic in our thinking, then let's embrace ambiguity, if not complementarity. Let's practice rejecting simplistic binaries early and often. Now, the Euro-American culture I was raised in bristles at the very idea of this. This culture, with its economic assumptions now imposed on the entire world, is based on rigid binaries. You're either growing or dying. You're either with us or against us. You're either civilized or savage, guilty or innocent, all or nothing, liberal or conservative, gay or straight, part of the problem or part of the solution. It's just not true. If we value the existence of life on this planet, why don't we start by consciously and deliberately trying to get comfortable with ambiguity and complementarity? We can call each other out when a nuanced question is posed as a binary. Is it really binary? What other perspectives are we missing? I don't have to tell you about the many global catastrophes we've already set in motion. Someone said, don't think of this as the hottest summer of the last 100 years. Think of it as the coolest summer of the next 100 years. I think if we want to have a chance of human life surviving, it's not enough to tweak our systems around the edges. We have to fundamentally change our culture, our worldviews, our values and expectations. To what, though? To something that works with natural reality instead of against it. Something with connection and humility built into its foundational narratives and assumptions. A worldview that encourages patience with ambiguous situations and presumes constant change and adaptation, including losses and cycles. A worldview that's aligned with the world. Can't see that. So we start with the best understandings we have about how reality works. We make what meaning we can from it, incorporating those insights into our deepest thoughts, our religious practices, all our human systems. One person, one tradition, one nation at a time. Because these threats that we face are global in scope and require global cooperation to mediate. So clergy people who are watching tonight, do you preach from the scripture of nature, of science? If not, why not? Is it not as valid a source about the mind of God as scriptures transcribed by people centuries ago? What's more, it's a common text shared across all theological boundaries and divisions. If you feel like you don't understand the science quite well enough, you can study it. Hook up with the AAAS's Science and Seminaries Project, or Rabbi Middleman's Sinai and Synapses, or one of the many Science and Islam projects. Iris's journal Zygon is a great resource too. Science people, are you applying insights from natural reality into your social and political life outside of your work in science? If not, why not? It's not that surprising that an adolescent culture that arose out of feudalism and superstition would be somewhat at odds with how reality works. But you are the prophets who are revealing how it works. Interpreting your findings for the benefit of society is not a betrayal of the data. It's part of the natural evolution from discovery to application. And if you don't guide that process, someone else will. And they're much more likely to get the science wrong. To everyone, I ask you to ask yourselves, what does the world need right now? And how can I be that? I think the world needs people who see the big picture. A precious planet on a minuscule, lonely galactic backwater that nevertheless harbors the rarest and most fragile jewel in the cosmos, life. The world needs people who look up at the heavens and see their own origins and feel in their bones their ever-renewing oneness with all of it. People who know that they matter and that they can't not matter. I think the world needs people who greet all their long-lost cousins with joy and reverence, and who humbly accept that they exist within evolving cycles, holy cycles of matter and energy, life and death, ebb and flow. I think the world needs people who value evolutionary change, recognizing that there isn't just one right way to do things, and that progress grows out of diversity and cooperation. I think the world needs people who revel in the mystical magic of emergence and who understand that their body is a sacred case of 1 + 1 = poetry, and care for themselves and their bodies accordingly. I think the world needs people who dig deep into their own culture and worldview, looking for alignment, looking for holism, actively seeking out nuance. People who seek commonalities across differences and separations of all kinds, mindful of their interbeing with everything. I think the world needs you. Thanks to everybody for being here and letting me speak with you tonight. I'm grateful also to Maynard for setting this up and CJ and Gail for being the behind the scenes crew. And I'm looking forward to Ron's response and to talking with him.
Thanks so much, JD. That was great. Some questions have come in already, but we're going to have the responders speak first. But I will encourage people to please ask questions, put them in the Q&A, and we'll handle them afterwards. So our respondent for today is Judge Ron Yoder. He has sung in many different choirs. He attends different churches, and he calls himself, quote, a Gandhi Protestant, Gandhi Protestant, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jew. So he's very much interfaith oriented. He served on the board of the Interfaith Council of Metropolitan Washington. He's established, there was in 2007, he established a scholarship at Virginia Tech Theological Seminary. He has been very active after graduating from the Virginia Law School. He spent a year at Yale Divinity School as a Rockefeller Fellow. He's practiced law in New York and Washington, D.C. for 14 years. He was a federal administrative law judge for 44 years until his retirement as chief judge of the U.S. Department of Transportation in January 2020. So he comes with a very interesting background, and we're interested to hear the comments that he's going to make next. Judge Ronnie, let me turn it over to you so that you can be a respondent here.
Hello. I was very interested to hear this presentation, and I read it along while you were presenting it, and I found that there's a lot of commonality between the two of us in knowing what we think needs to be done. We need to find people who seek commonalities along differences and separations of all kinds, and we need to find that we're all part of the same world. We are all cousins descended from a little lady 100,000 years ago. I've often introduced myself as a light-skinned black, because we're all black. It's just some are blacker than others, and they're now talking about a multiverse where there are an infinite number of places, and if that's true, then in some place I'm you, and you're me. So we really need to see each other as cousins. But in trying to get to the unity and kinship and communication that is implicit in your speech, I find myself always looking for how do you do that? How do you communicate across people and places? And if we look to creation as an answer, then you come up with the question of how creation does work. Number one, you have chaos. Number two, you have survival of the fittest. If you have to cooperate to survive, how do you cooperate? Well, you cooperate through communication in a similar language. The world presents, the creation presents a dog-eat-dog food chain. It's basically unfeeling and uncaring. It is heading for extinction and oblivion within maybe 5 billion years when our sun is supposed to end. And where do you look for love and kindness in this list? You find love and kindness in creation, but you don't find it very well commonly articulated. The things that people add to this mix are beauty, art, music, religion, philosophy, and science. Those are all things created by the mind of man. And in that, we search for order and meaning. But what is the philosophical center if you look in science for an answer to how we get all these people working in the same direction? There are 800,000 Unitarians, 8.8 million scientists. There are 5.8 billion people in religions of one kind or another across the world. And finding commonality and unity with them is a real task. Everyone creates their own philosophical spiritual center that some people call God. Every song is a prayer which builds your self-understanding and your own myth structure. Now, those are not necessarily things that are going to bring the world together. How can you communicate spiritually without a common self-understanding or philosophical center? And you can't bring people together without it. That's why I have begun to call myself a Gandhi Protestant. In other words, he called himself a Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jew, and my upbringing and understanding is basically Protestant. So I call myself a Gandhi Protestant, building on the truths within each of those systems and making them comport to a standard, a philosophical standard that is consistent with my understanding of how people should be living and getting along. The Interfaith Council of Metropolitan Washington is 11 different world religions trying to bring the world together to build bridges, not walls or barriers. My scholarship at Virginia Theological Seminary is structured on the question of whether love is an appropriate center for all religions and philosophies. We've had papers submitted in connection with that scholarship from all over the world, more than 100 at this point. But if love is the center, love is not soft or easy. Ask Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, the Anabaptists who forgave the murderers of their children, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who concluded that his God of love required him to kill Hitler. It's okay for each of these religions to have their own myths and creeds and music and scripture, provided they are supported by an appropriate philosophical center and are demythologized. Music and art add beauty and feeling if they support an appropriate philosophical center and are demythologized. But Jesus loves me, this I know, and onward Christian soldiers suggest rather substantially different gods and philosophical centers. And we need to pay attention to that, not only in Christianity, but in all religions. Blind subservience to doctrines and creeds destroys the unity and kinship that you were talking about. The Lutherans decided they should kill all the Anabaptists because they wouldn't baptize babies. I'm here now because we left Switzerland, and I didn't get caught up in the mass killing of Anabaptists. Kill all the witches, the Salem witchcraft trials. Kill all infidels. Kill all Muslims, or at least bar them from immigration. Gandhi once said to a Hindu rioter who had smashed a child's head, a Muslim child, against the wall, that the way he could atone for his conduct was to raise a Muslim child as a Muslim and atone. Presumably, however, not an Orthodox fundamentalist, but as a Gandhi Muslim, which proceeds from an assumption that there is a philosophical center that overrides everything else. And without that philosophical center, we all go in various directions. Mother Teresa, in her Simple Path book, said, "I've always said that we should help a Hindu become a better Hindu, a Muslim become a better Muslim, and a Catholic become a better Catholic. But what is better? Not fundamentalist, ritualistically better. A Gandhi Hindu, a Gandhi Muslim, a Gandhi Catholic." And everyone will recognize that I'm talking symbolically here, that this phrase is intended to mean you use the symbols and structures of those world religions, but you bring them together under a single philosophical center. And where you find things that are inconsistent with that philosophical center, you don't use them. So the question is, we still need a philosophical standard for measurement. And question is, does science provide one?
All right, that was great.
Thank you so much, Judge Ronnie. We now normally allow JD a little discussion between the two of you. So JD, do you have anything you want to say to Judge Ronnie and Ronnie back?
Yeah, I loved what he said. I love the idea of love as the center, the philosophical center. I think what I'm offering is a little different. I think love is probably the only philosophical center that could, that is, I think Ron is absolutely right when he says that each religion has its different doctrines, and embedded in those doctrines are both things that we would all regard as good and helpful and unifying, and also things that that tear us apart and cause us to commit violence against one another. Love is the common area that is common to all the different theological approaches and the different cultural traditions. What science offers isn't so much a philosophical center, but a common scripture. And that's what I guess it's part of what I'm offering. It's the heart of what I'm offering, because all of those religions, with all their different doctrines about the supernatural, they all do their work. They all live their lives. All the people that are in those traditions and developing those traditions live in natural reality. It is one thing that we all have in common. Even if somebody doesn't believe in love as a worthwhile goal or a worthwhile anything, they still have to live in natural reality. And what we've found over the centuries is that the findings of science become, they get woven into the cultural fabric sooner or later. There aren't many people, there are a few, of course, but by and large, the human race has accepted that the Earth is a sphere that rotates once a day and goes around the sun. That was hugely controversial 400 years ago. Very few people accepted that because it was bizarre, it was crazy to think that way. But now we just accept it. It's built into the fabric of our worldview. What I'm attempting to do is speed up that process so that we don't have to wait 400 years for people to weave into their worldview the way natural reality works as we understand it now. So science doesn't offer a philosophical center. I agree with Ron on that, but it does offer, it could offer a common scripture, a common body of knowledge, literally body of knowledge. That's what science means. The original Latin means knowledge. And
but does it offer a common scripture accessible by 6 billion people?
sure, it will.
Don't weave it into the fabric of the cultural and philosophical centers that they do relate to, you'll never reach them.
Absolutely, completely agree. And that's what we need to do. We need to make all of our clergy science literate as well as we can. And those clergy need to
Amen
commit
to
themselves.
that.
What's that?
Just try to get them to tell people what they know about the religions that they are preaching. That's a big job.
I am asking a lot for sure. But really all I'm asking is that we accelerate the process. If things continue as they have over the last 500 years, by 500 years from now, this will all be common knowledge. It will be woven into people's worldviews. I just want us to do it in the next 5 years instead of the next 500, if we can. And each person has to do that on their own. And a lot of it is cultural. I think you hit it right on the head. The way our culture interacts with the world and orients itself in the world is very much focused on dog eat dog, competition, get while you can, take what you can. And there are elements of that in natural reality. Absolutely. Survival of the fittest is part of it. But cooperation and competition work together. And they've been doing that for billions of years. And it's time we express that in our culture now that we know that it's true. And we didn't even know that 100 years ago. Cooperation was kind of on the fringes of evolutionary biology. But now we see it everywhere. And we can't even digest our own food without a whole ecosystem inside of us helping us do that. So I think of it, actually one of the taglines I have played around with is the interfaith promise of science. Science is what we all share. Natural reality is something we all share. And, you know, Christianity has, there are subsets of Christianity that have taken on new scriptures. For example, the Book of Mormon. And to a Jewish person might consider Christianity to have added scriptures to Judaism. I'm suggesting that every religion add another scripture to preach from and to take wisdom and insight from. And that's reality itself as science reveals it. So, and I completely agree with you that love has to be part of that. And right now our cultures don't express that as well as they could.
Well, we'll work together.
Ah, good.
Okay, guys, this is a great conversation. Let's bring some others in by opening it up for the questions. There are some questions in the Q&A, and let me remind the audience to feel free to put in some questions. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but we're going to try. So the first one is from Jason Kuhn, and he says, he actually says, what a great talk, JD. The first inkling of a nature-rooted spirituality is often awe, oceanic feeling, wonder, humility, which we are all individually truly spiritual feelings. I think there are many people on this planet that are in touch with that. How do we committed religious naturalists get people to move beyond the internal spirituality to the external one, the one that cares, that loves, that motivates to do good, that abides, etc.?
I don't know. That's the honest answer. I think education is part of it, sharing the good news. I mean, there's no reason that people, like Neil deGrasse Tyson said in that short video clip, I want to grab people in the street and have you heard this? That's the gospel of the awesomeness of natural reality. And I use that word in its original meaning, awesome, invoking awe. And there's a lot of research on awe. And when people are experiencing awe, the parts of their brains that light up are the same parts that light up when people are in deep prayer and meditation. And so there is a spirituality to be found through experiences of awe. And so getting yourself and your family to go and see the eclipse, being aware of what's awesome around you, even just walking through a forest. I read a study in which they had college students walk among trees or walk among buildings, and found that unbeknownst to the students themselves, the way their bodies and brains responded after walking through the trees was very similar to an experience of awe. And again, similar to a religious experience. And they behaved more altruistically after walking through the trees. So part of it is just awareness, that getting outside, paying attention to the phases of the moon, and learning some science. Take some science classes. There are all kinds of webinars, and there's stuff happening all the time. Get down to your local museum and your planetarium and let yourself experience it in a religious way. And the more people who do that and share those experiences with other people, and are willing to be a little bit courageous and say, whatever your religious background is, this is part of it. This going to the museum is part of my Christian faith, or part of my Muslim observance, or part of my whatever your faith is, and being willing to say that with your circle of friends and people that you know, so that they at least begin to question. So maybe that I sort of contradicted myself when I gave that long answer to I don't know. Hopefully that answers the question. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, JD. This question's from Paul Carr. Do you agree that a newer testament should be added to our present Bible, whose science is 2,000 years old?
I think I don't want to tell any particular tradition or denomination how they should incorporate this. I'm just asking them to do it in the way that works best for them. So I am not a Christian theologian. I wouldn't presume to say yes or no to that question. The text of natural reality isn't a written text. So you can't get all legalistic about it. You have to interpret it, but I'm not even sure how the mechanics of that would work. How would you add it? Yeah, I'm going to leave that to the theologians in each tradition to figure it out. But I want to add one more thing to my response to what Ron said. He pointed out that there are so many Unitarians and so many Christians and so many people. But there's several large groups of people that aren't included often when people talk about various religious faiths and traditions. And those are the spiritual but not religious, the nuns, the atheists, and the agnostics. And they share natural reality as well. And I encourage them also to interpret it as though it were a kind of scripture, because those insights are available to them too. And they don't require any belief in anything other than purely natural reality.
Very good. Sort of related, and this is just a comment. Tariq Mustafa made several comments, and he says at the end, he says, JD, you are so right. But he makes the comment, and he's quoting from the Quran here, we shall show you our signs in the cosmos till you accept that this is the truth. So it seems as though he's seeing a resonance between what the Quran says and what you were saying. I don't know if you want to comment or not. I just wanted to
Well,
reflect.
it reminds me of the United Church of Christ's tagline. I'm not sure if they're still using it, but I love it. It was God is still speaking. And one of the ways God still speaks is through science. So, yeah.
Very good. Jane C says, I was really interested in the square dance analogy and how it relates to the object wave question. Like, it made me just kind of start to get it. Could you talk a little more about that?
Gail, you froze. I'm not sure if it was at my end or not. She's asking, how does the square dance relate to?
Yeah, do you want me to read it again? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yeah.
Oh, okay, great. I was really interested in the square dance analogy and how it relates to the object wave question. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I wish I had time to go into it much deeper, but in short, we now know that everything in the universe that we would regard as a thing is made of these weird things that at the heart of them are energy. All matter was made out of energy in the first 10 to the minus 35 seconds after time began. So everything that we think of as a thing is actually more an event than a thing. It's more a verb than a noun, although even the word verb is a noun. So you can tie yourself up pretty quickly. The square dance analogy, I originally started using it for atoms. An atom is like a square dance, and the subatomic particles that are in the atoms are like square dances. Each one is an event that acts like a thing. And when they're acting like things, they can build upon one another to make macro scale objects. But when you look closer and closer and closer and try to figure out what are they really, all that you find is energy. And that means there are no nouns in this universe. There are no objects. There are only verbs, only events, only happenings, only the flow of time and energy doing interesting things as time flows. That's hard to get your head around because most of us, myself included, still have to operate in a Newtonian paradigm. And how will we express this new quantum understanding? Sooner or later, it is going to get woven into the fabric of how we orient ourselves in the world. Right now, it's hard to see. But you can think of every object you've ever interacted with as an event that's made up of smaller and smaller events acting like objects.
Right. Connie Berthka has kind of an out of this world question. If we discovered intelligent life on another planet, would your spirituality be impacted or changed in any way?
Hugely, hugely, immensely. I don't know exactly how. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we found that out in our lifetimes? And what an impact that would have. Well, how would we interact differently with the climate emergency if we knew for sure that there was life elsewhere? I don't know. It's really fun to think about. But yeah, I can't imagine that it would have massive, massive impacts on all of our worldviews, personally and also globally.
Great. Next question from Sally Bowden-Shable. Your thinking is deeply wise and reflects such knowledge of science and the natural order of things. I believe we are in the adolescence of human development as a global society. I have such difficulty being with truth of suffering as it is being experienced here and now that results from the ignorance of individuals in control and who make decisions that profoundly affect all beings, including the health of the living planet that sustains all life. So maybe here's my question. How do you maintain resilience, some kind of hope or faith, if the ship is sinking, time is running out for humanity? How do you reach those in power with the wisdom of your message?
Oh, if I knew that, I'd be doing it. Speaking like this is part of it. It's the universe, and especially human societies, are complex system. And so complexity theory plays a role. I think if each of us just keep doing what we're doing, we don't know what we don't know. So, I don't know who's watching this now, and I don't know what each of you are going to do with what you heard tonight. But there may be a path that I can't see and won't see between what I said tonight and some world leader that can make a difference. And that's not just true of me, that's true of every person, every minute of their lives. I feel like I'm not answering the question very well, but each of us has to do what we can. And I too find myself often in dismay, if not despair, especially the last year or two, as I see us not doing what needs to be done on front after front after front. So certainly the little things like voting and using less when you can, it's all stuff, you know, I'm blathering now, but I appreciate the question, Sally. And I just don't know what it will take. I do know that we're not doing it yet.
Sally puts in a quote, wisdom is knowing I am nothing, love is knowing I am everything, and between the two, my life moves, which is very beautiful. I'm going to take the privilege of asking the last question. So I find this model of using kind of the book of nature as the new kind of scripture in a very interesting thought. But my worry as a scientist is that I see the book of nature misinterpreted by many people who don't understand science. They draw conclusions that are totally inappropriate. They have understandings that are, I mean, it seems to me that it requires a level of education that I'm not sure our culture and our society, you know, actually developed. And I'd like to know your thoughts about that.
Yeah, great question, Gail. I think part of the dysfunction that's happening is that many scientists are really reticent to even weigh in, to even wade in to those public discussions. And the ones that do too often keep pounding this point about how the universe is devoid of meaning and meaningless, and you know, the very strident, militant for me, the word atheist is a word that I cherish. So I don't mean to be knocking anyone, but in the public discourse, it's still very much a binary. You're either spiritual and religious, or you're scientific and an atheist. And I think, as I said in the last part of my speech there, I want scientists to weigh in, to be vulnerable to when they see bad science being misused in the public sphere, to speak up and say, you know, if you're a Christian and a scientist, say, hey, I'm a Christian and I know more about that than you do, and here's the truth, and here's why I think it's important, and here's what it means to me. But I think a lot of scientists are really shy about sharing themselves and their thought processes authentically, and doing so in a way that's inclusive and respectful of people from other traditions.
It's a risky time for scientists. I mean, I have to admit. I mean, look at they're talking about putting Fauci on trial for you know criminal behavior. I mean, it's a hard time, but let's hope this passes. I appreciate your optimistic message. I want to thank both of our speakers. JD, this was fabulous. It was very inspiring, actually. And Judge Ronnie, your comments were provocative and made us really think hard. I'm grateful to both of you. I think it was really wonderful.